Ladies in the audience, you better get your man closer. I guess that's a bit of a stereotype, isn't it? That, like, ladies, the women are the scared one. Sometimes it's the man, and sometimes the man needs to... I mean, there can be any kind of relationship as well. The whole thing is falling apart. Either way, I guess what I'm trying to say is that this is going to be a spooky tutorial. So if you're scared, find another human, find an animal. The options are endless to grab because we are making ghosts in this tutorial. And it's not just, you know, a cloth simulation. It's really a mix of cloth simulation with some pretty advanced material stuff going on here to make this ghost kind of look translucent, transparent, the holes, there's holdout. There's a lot going on here. So let's talk about how to make ghosts easily. Okay, so starting off, yes, this is going to be a cloth simulation. The idea is we're going to have a sphere, and then if we drape cloth over it, it kind of looks like I'm drawing a girl with pigtails. Here we go. If we have a cloth draped over it, we can have physics run the cloth draping, the ghost moving, and then the rest of it's going to be in material. So let's do that. To set up the cloth, I'm just going to add in a sphere, maybe subdivide it a bit. It doesn't really matter, but I added a subsurface of level 1. It's just going to have a smoother collision surface, but that's up to you if you care about that. And we're going to put a plane on top of it. For the plane, make sure you subdivide it a lot. The more geometry we have to work with, the more detailed our simulation is going to be. And also, the heavier the cloth is going to be, because each vertex you're going to see actually weighs a certain amount, which doesn't, I guess it does make sense. It's almost like you want to imagine this fabric is held with a bunch of weights like chainmail, but it would be cool to have a uniform mass. I think there's a way to do that. Either way, subdivide it a bunch. In physics, make this a cloth and make the sphere a collision because the cloth needs to collide with the thing. So there we go. Looks horrible. How do we make it look better? Well, first of all, the cloth needs to go way further down. So I'm going to scale this up. And let's see, the bigger we make the cloth, the more down it goes. Let's add a bit more subdivision, which also makes the simulation slower, but you know, what are you going to do? And yeah, it looks like, well, let's just say it like this. I'm recording in the dining room, which happens to be where the cat litter box is. And let's just say the smell got twice as strong. So we have a lot of stuff to fix here. It looks bad. It's self-intersecting. Let's do these one at a time. So first of all, the fabric is colliding with itself. This is just a problem of collisions, and we enable self-collision. So the cloth resists itself. Perfect. Next, there just isn't detail in this, and it kind of looks boring. So I'm going to shade smooth. That kind of fixes kind of the problem. But second of all, I'm going to add a subdivision surface. And this is kind of an interesting thing. I'm going to do the simulation, and then I'm going to smooth it. As opposed to if I did it this way, you can see that it's taking much longer to simulate because we're having more geometry to work with. So first simulate, then subdivide. It's the order of operations really matters here. Another thing we can do is for this cloth, you know, you can set these numbers to be whatever. I'm just going to use a preset called silk, which changes the numbers for me, and it's going to give us more of a kind of a loose cloth look. Again, for more detail, add another subdivision. I'll probably stop at this level of subdivision because it's looking quite detailed to me, and I think I'm happy with that. Really, the last thing you need to ask yourself is how far should the fabric drape. I'm sorry I keep changing the audio. I have an itch, a scratch, and it. Everybody always says I have a scratch when they mean an itch. It's one of those words people get confused. I have an itch in my ear. Is it an infection? I don't know. So there we go. We have the basic cloth down. And by the way, let's save this. I'm gonna call it Patreon Ghost because it's available on Patreon. Okay, whatever. I'm gonna let's do a bit of a. How many sentences am I going to start and not finish them? Let's do a bit of movement on this. So let's say the cloth collides, perfect, it's hanging. Then on frame 88, because that's, you know, just the one we happen to land on, I'm going to keyframe the location, and over 50 frames or so, I'm going to move it down the x-axis. So I'm just keyframing the location, as you can see. Well, what this is going to do is it's going to give us motion for our ghost. But first it has to drape, and then it can move. And because this is all collision based, it's going to do the proper like spooky ghost thing where it's like the fabric's trailing and it all looks correct. In fact, we're now just going to make a material for this and it's going to be done. But since we're going to make it transparent, we want, this is like an underskirt shot. Whoa. You want to make the sphere invisible so that it's just fabric. It's being held up by nothing. And by the way, this is something we could totally replace with a Suzanne instead of the sphere for a little gag that I don't find funny, really. The Suzanne thing's kind of played out for me. Either way, let's make a nice material for this. Before we begin, always, I'm just going to set up my scenes. I'm using cycles. I don't want this light, but instead I want, so this is just the steps I do every time. Could I automate it and have the blend file open with these settings? Yes, but I'm not gonna. So I'm just setting up an HDRI and I'm making that HDRI transparent, just so we have some basic lighting. And now the question is, what can we do to this to one, make it look ghost-like, but second of all, we want to cut out holes, eye holes. And the thing about this, by the way, is you're like, okay, why don't you just like go back to the cloth and then, you know, cut 2 holes with the knife tool and then simulate it? That's just expensive. And there's no guarantee the eyes are going to fall in the right place. So we somehow need to make a system that puts the eyes in the right place and isn't as expensive. What I'm trying to say is we can do this in the shader editor. And by the way, I just got to check the time because I have a special appointment coming up. And it seems like people are coming upstairs as well. Okay, so we need to make this thing look like a ghost. Here's how we're going to do it. In the shading workspace, I'm going to make a material. What can we do to make this ghost-like? Well, first of all, obviously, take down the alpha. This is just going to make it somewhat see-through. The more you do this, the more ghostly it would look, right? That's obvious. But second of all, we wanted to have kind of this, like, you know, the stereotypical Ghostbusters ectoplasm look to it, which means I want to highlight some of these fabric contours with the kind of slimy green look. The trick I always use that I learned in a Ducky tutorial and have since made it my own is you take a Fresnel, you bring it down so it has all these contours and all that. You're going to connect that to the emission strength and make the emission, you know, ectoplasmy color, so this kind of teal. And that is going to highlight, you know, the correct areas on the thing. Now, again, the question is, how do we cut out eye holes? That's kind of the big deal. Well, here's a observation. If we use texture coordinates, almost all of them are useless. Like, we have generated coordinates. You can see they look weird because of the subdivision and the simulation. Object coordinates are a bit better, but they don't stick to it. So look at this vertex right here. It's gonna fall, and then, oh wait, do object coordinates work? It seems like they do, but I think that might be a trick of the eye. Let's see as we have this. Yeah, you can see there's a bit of shifting. No texture coordinate system is gonna follow this, so if we make any cutouts, it's not gonna work. Except for UV. Because the plane already has UV coordinates, these are going to stick onto the mesh. So again, look at this corner, this black corner. It's sticking on even during the motion, which means anything we do with UV coordinates are going to move with our thing. That's the big insight, okay? Big deal, big whoop. Well, here's why it's useful. If we use a distance function, so I'm saying take our UV coordinates and let's compare it to 0.5, 0.5, give me the distance. You can see we now have this black point. Again, we're taking the vectors, we're saying what's the distance, the length, the, you know, how much do you have to move to get from there to 0.5, 0.5? Well, it's going to be a radial thing, and this dot is moving with the surface. What this means is if we now shift the dot, and it's going to be a bit awkward, just like everybody's first time, it's just awkward. If we shift it over, you can now see we have kind of like an eye hole, and to actually make this legit, we could use like a less than or a greater than, and bring down the radius. So we have a circle. That is actually following our deformation, okay? That's kind of the big insight here. So I'm just going to make this smaller, and maybe we want to make this kind of oval-like. Wouldn't that be cool? To do that, I think I didn't even do this with the original, but I think all we have to do is multiply our coordinate system. And we're going to have to do a bit of shifting, it seems. But that is fine. So I multiply it by that, and now we have an oval. Because I've stretched it on the y-axis, which is kind of like shrinking on the x-axis if you think about it. Either way, we've created this oval, and yeah, let's make 2 of them. So all I have to do is I have to take this, copy it, use it again, and then there's a couple ways to do this. I'm going to use well, let's see. It's white only on the eye. Yeah, I don't know why my voice cracked. That was lame. It's white only on the eye. So if we want 2 of them, let's just add those together. And for this one, I'm going to shift it like that. And you can see how we've already given it, and this is kind of the cool part. We've positioned our eyes so you can actually see it on the UV map before the deformation. And then with the deformation, it's going to naturally fall into the right place and be subject to all the deformation and all this. I know I've said it 100 times, but, you know, sometimes when you improv, wow, the dog outside's going nuts. He probably, you know, they say dogs react to ghosts. Maybe this is what's going on. Okay, dumb joke. Let's actually have these cut out of the thing. So one way to do this is you're thinking, okay, we have this alpha function. Maybe what we can do is run this through a color ramp, and this isn't a bad idea, right? So you run it through a color ramp. You say, take the black, which is all of the fabric, and make it like, 50% transparent, and make the eyes black, which means alpha 0. So I'm basically just remapping this so that when we use it on the alpha, it looks like this. And it kind of makes sense. Again, you can kind of see through the eye holes, but you can see it kind of looks messy. You can kind of not tell where the eyes are, and that's a big problem. So here's what I propose. This isn't a perfect solution, but it kind of is a perfect solution. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mix this, use the eyes as the factor. I'm going to mix this with, right now you can see it's perfectly black, which kind of illustrates the point. Now it's much more visible. But I'm going to mix it with a holdout shader. What holdout does is it gets rid of everything behind it. It's almost like transparency if everything behind it turns to 0. So it's kind of different from transparency. It's kind of like inverse opaqueness is probably a better way to think about it. And again, what's happening here is we have this. It's just a fabric thing with the alpha and all this. But I'm saying on the white areas, mix a holdout. Make it transparent. And to make it less intense, what we can do, and we can kind of play with this so it's not 100% intense, is we can multiply it. So when we multiply it by 0, it's as if it's not there. When we multiply by 1, we have a holdout. And everywhere in between just kind of makes it, somewhere in between. And I think that looks pretty good. Now, you could call it quits here, but I'm not gonna, because what makes this look ghostly is the transparency, right? I think we agree with that. And by the way, the big thing to play with is this slider right here. Do you want it to be opaque, transparent? How, that's the big thing to play with here. But I would like it if as we go downwards, right, it gets more and more transparent, as if it's kind of like a floating entity. I mean, it is. It's a floating entity, and it's a ghost, so it should kind of have like the tail of it, if you think about it that way, should be transparent. Well, how do we isolate the bottom area? Because again, if we use generated coordinates, object coordinates, they don't seem to work. Well, this is another thing we can do with UV coordinates. So let's think about it. What part of the UV coordinates is this section? Well, it's exactly the perimeter. It's the edges of this. Because if you look at the edges, let's put this on solid view. If you look at the edges, those are the parts that drape down the furthest. And you can see how much the material really does here. So here's our simulation, and here's everything the material does. It kind of carries it. So in other words, to make this transparent, we need to make the edges transparent. So let's isolate the edges. So I'm going to separate x, y, z. We're using UV coordinates. And that we want to separate the x and the y and do some stuff with it. So I'm just going to do a bit of math, and I'll explain it in a second. So I'm going to take our x. We're going to subtract it by 0.5. This subtraction basically says how far down the thing do you want it to be. And to make it reflective, in other words, going on both sides, I'm going to absolute value. Okay? So we have this gradient that is 0, exactly where it's 0.5 or whatever number, and then it goes positive in both directions because of the absolute value. Okay? I'm going to do that twice, one for the x, one for the y, and then to combine them, so here's x, here's y. To combine them, I'm going to do something a bit weird. I'm going to take, I think it's the maximum. I'm going to take the maximum, which kind of creates this crosshair map. What's happening here is I'm saying take the bigger of the two, which kind of creates an it happens to create an SDF for a square, as you can see. But this is a great way to isolate the perimeter. And you could think about why that's the case. As we go further out, we're taking the bigger of the two. It's going to preserve corners where x is equal to y and negative x is equal to negative y. You could think about all that, or you could not. And I think that's much easier. The point being, we could take this color ramp and kind of pinch and isolate these areas. What do I want to do with this? I want to take the alpha and subtract away this stuff, because we want it to be more transparent, closer to 0, so subtraction. And let's see, again, we'd probably want to play this out a bit more. So I'm just waiting. You can see the Fresnel's catching. I should probably just cache the simulation so I don't have to do this 100 times. So let's talk about how to do that. You go to cache, you give the cache a name like buddy, and we bake it. This is just so that we don't have to do it over and over and over again. And 250 frames is a bit overkill, and I'm worried. And I need to talk. I need to fill in the space. I need to... You think I'm joking, but I'm actually a bit like, what do I say? Social awkwardness? Huh? What's that? Okay. So now that this is done baking, this should play. Yeah, now it's playing nice and fast. I should have done this ages ago. Now that it's doing it nice and fast, let's again focus on isolating these areas. So first of all, this is an addition. We want a subtraction. And you can see now it's fading here. And again, the control for this is the color ramp. As you can see, we can have it like go up here, or we could have it do something fancy. I want to use an ease. I want it to go about this high, and the sharpness of it is dictated by this, how close the black and white sliders are. But I think I'm pretty happy with this. So here is the before and after. It just adds a bit of something. And yeah, another thing we can do is this is now a nice gradient that I'm going to invert. So it starts off white and then it goes closer and closer to black. Do I want this on the factor? I don't know. Sometimes I get confused by color ramp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something simple. I'm going to take my color ramp and I'm just going to invert it. I guess it is getting darker, but it's a little hard to tell. So I'm going to do one of these. There we go. Set that to linear as well. What this is doing is now we have white up here and it goes closer to black, and instead of transparency, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this. It's going to be subtle, but I'm going to use this for the base color. So instead of just being white fabric, it kind of gets darker, which I kind of like the look of, right? Another thing we can do that I just thought of is let's also make the ectoplasm emission also subject to this. So I'm just adding, and that should, if we add another color ramp, that should let us. Why does it not like these color ramps? I'm confused. I think we need to push the white. There we go. That is going to kind of modify our emission map, so it's kind of glowing back there. I don't know if you can see it, but it's there. Here, now it's much more visible. And I think that really ties it together, because now you can really see the edges of the fabric, which are the furthest down parts, whatever. One more thing that we could do to really optimize this is up to you, is we can have the fabric be different colors on the inside and the outside. In other words, if this is our fabric, so again, we're just creating a special material, we could have this side be different from the bottom facing side. Okay? If you want to do that, just a simple thing you can do is use a geometry node, and you can see it has this back facing option, which makes it black on one side, white on the other. I'm going to invert it so it's the opposite, white on one side, black on the other. And you could, let's see what this looks like, you could also use this as a base color so that, you know, it drapes, it does the thing. It's just going to give it a bit more volume in some sense. Let's see what this looks like. It might not make too much of a difference. So here's before, and, well, let me open up the timeline. So here is before and after. It's subtle, but I think it gives it a tiny bit more volume. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to multiply it so that we have a contribution from both. I'm going to multiply it with our, what did we want to use? Did we want to use this one? I believe so. Or maybe we want to do an addition. Let's see, what does this look like? Yeah, that's going to make it black cloth. Maybe an addition. Before, after. I don't know if that makes too much of a difference. But either way, that's kind of the essence of it. To get different kind of ghosts, you do a different kind of simulation, and you can change the color of it. So now we have a red. I feel like, again, the classic color is this kind of ectoplasmy greenish. And again, this Fresnel is huge. It's going to be how much emission we have. So you want to be kind of subtle with it. Nothing too crazy. I say as I make it even crazier. But I kind of like the look of that. Again, we have that fancy holdout at like 80% on the eyes. Duplicate to get another. Well, I tried to get another, but now I just have 2 planes. But look at that. And to animate the ghost, you just animate the sphere. I think you get it at this point. So I think that's the essence of the tutorial. Here's the material, by the way. Not too shabby. So at the end of these tutorials, as always, I like to promote the ever-living ectoplasm, let's go with that, out of my Patreon. For those of you that don't know, this channel is driven. The reason I can make stuff for free is it is driven by 700 to 800 people paying very small amounts, or some of them very big amounts, and thank you for that, on Patreon, link in the description. What you get is not just a donation for this channel, CG Matter and Default Cube, but you get things in return. So first of all, you get the blend file. You do not need to make this yourself. I will provide the blend file. This is actually part of a bigger project. That's what the tracking tutorial was about. We're going to put ghosts in the footage. So now we have the 2 parts that will collide, and we put ghosts in the footage. You get the blend file, so you don't need to make this material yourself. You can just download it, tweak it, whatever you want to do with it. Also, you get early access to tutorials, so you could have seen this one, I believe, 2 days early or maybe 3 days early. And lastly, you get exclusive tutorials, access to tutorials that I do not post on YouTube. Those are behind a paywall. I don't make too many of those because I want to keep everything I do relatively free. Like, you know how to make the blend, but you can also buy it and, you know, whatever. And by the way, when you become a patron and you get the blend files, you can get any blend file I've made over the last 3 years for $5. So it's not just this one. You get access to any tutorial I've made where I've uploaded the blend, that as well. As always, thank you so much to the patrons. You guys are the reason that I can do this and make it available for free. And thank you guys for watching. Whether or not you want to become a patron, it's fine. I hope you learned something, and that is it.